Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, my boy, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. It's very early evening and it's already pitch black. I would like the summer back, but other than that, I'm doing well.
I've been taking vitamin D tablets for the past month.
Oh yeah, for real.
The UK is bleak, but what is not bleak is the hotness of our episode today. As hot as my transitions anyway. Today, we're going to be talking about the Arena Vintage Cube. We're going to be deep diving into some of the stats that have come out of it, because this is the first time we've ever really got statistics on Cube. So today, we're going to be kind of deep diving into that a little bit, and some of the interesting results that have come out from it, I think is a fair way to say, James.
Yeah, I think certainly the cards that the data says are quote unquote the best are probably not the cards you would pick in a vacuum, but there's some spicy results in here. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And so we're going to be looking at it in terms of what we can take from the data, what we can learn from the data, and also kind of try and talk about how it can actually affect our cube building and what we think the future of this cube, or how we can use the data to affect choices we make when we build our own cubes and all that good stuff. Before we kind of deep dive into some data, James, I think we should probably just start with, like, how was your experience of the Arena Powered Cube? What did you think about it?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty fun, actually. I think it plays noticeably differently from the versions we've had on Magic Online, but not like night and day. I think the aggro decks are really good, but certainly not unbeatable, I think. I just sort of drafted blue decks for the whole season. I think I did like 10 drafts. I drafted a bunch of blue decks, a couple of Loras decks. I think Loras actually matched up really well against the format, just to incentivize you to just have lots of cheap removal. And I think that lots of cheap removal and some card advantage is a nice way to beat out the Boros Menace. And I drafted a few combo decks to mixed success. I think the very first draft I did, I second picked a Brain Freeze, and that was an error. But yeah, overall, I had a lot of fun with the cube. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, same. I really enjoyed it. It was the most amount of cube I've played in a short amount of time, if that makes sense. Yeah, because I don't play MitGo, because I want my interfaces to look better than Windows 98 and stuff. Yeah, like we normally cube once every couple of weeks, so just having access to it for like 3 weeks, like whenever I was on, I played some games on my lunch break. I played a bunch after work. I played on my phone. That was, yeah, just having it in the Arena client and it being so accessible, I thought was awesome. I really liked it. Yeah, I did get bodied several times. I logged on like the moment it started to do a cube, like to actually record a video. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'll do a video. And like, it was best of one was ranked, and I was in bronze at the time because I hadn't played Arena in like 4 years, or whatever it is. But like, because I was in one of the first groups of people to fire, it was like mythics and then low numbers. So I think I was playing against like a bunch of top 50 in the world. I was just getting steamrolled and bodied after bodied for like the first hour. So I was like, okay, we're not going to release this video because it is not content. Just seeing the light slowly die from my eyes as I get bodied by like all of LSV's mates and such.
I think some people might be into that, you know?
If we ever do a Patreon, maybe that can be the starting goal. You get to see the body cut, but yeah, but no, just having access to it free reignly was awesome. Yeah. I played some games on my phone, which is not what I thought I'd ever be doing with Arena. With Powered Cube. But yeah, outside of a few balancing things, which we'll kind of probably touch on today, I thought that as an experience, awesome. Bring me back. Like the next time I play Arena will be when it comes back. We don't know when it's going to come back at this point, I think, at time of recording anyway.
Yeah, I'd assume it will be next time there is a not minuscule gap between sets, right? Because I think now it's quite close to the Lorwyn's obviously coming up in the new year, and then it's quite a small break to
Avatar came out on Friday at time
Well,
of recording.
exactly, yeah. There's a small break between Avatar and Lorwyn, relatively. So I'm guessing it doesn't get in before Lorwyn, and then maybe it's in around the like stupid turtle set because no one's going to actually want to draft that anyway because it's a small set. So I'd guess maybe that's when it comes back.
Sick. Okay, we'll do an update video to the cube when that comes out. But yeah, so let's actually going to move on to the data that we're going to be talking about today. I think one of the important things to mention just off the bat is that we have never had this level of data before. Kind of, we'll jump into how it was acquired in a moment, but kind of like these type of plugins and these type of analytics just aren't available on MitGo and aren't available in paper because no one like outside of playgroups, people aren't really recording like wins and losses of cards and stuff. James, talk to us about kind of like how the data was actually collected in the Arena client for the Powered Cube.
Yeah, so it's collected using a pretty popular tracking tool for Arena called 17 Lands. So this has been a thing for quite a while now, mostly amongst the like limited grinders on Arena. But it's become pretty popular. And because it's pretty popular and a lot of people who have it play a lot, we end up with really pretty big data sets for these cubes. So 17 Lands is basically a tool that you can install and it'll like track your wins and your losses and you can go and look at your stats and that's interesting for players. But it also will send your stats off to a sort of central website where you can view the aggregated stats across all players. So you can see across all players who had 17 Lands installed, for example, like how frequently are they drafting particular cards, how frequently are they playing them, and when they put those cards in their deck, how often are they winning? So we end up with pretty big data. I think we had 500,000 games for this cube season. So it's that's enough data where you can start to draw some pretty reliable conclusions, really. But you do need to put it in context. But what we are seeing here is not data from all the players on Arena. It is data from a very specific subset of people, i.e. the ones who decided to go out and install this tracking tool.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're installing a tracking tool to see to see your win rates and all this kind of stuff, it means that you're probably going to be at a minimum, a enfranchised player, but also someone who's looking to improve and get better. Like I know that like testing teams use this data to kind of like help them win or to help them compete in like GPs or like competitive events, that kind of stuff. Kind of like does that bring problems to the data, would you say, James?
Yeah, for sure. So it's so firstly you've got to sort of adjust the data a little bit just because the players you're looking at is not a cross section of all players, right? So for example, the main stat we're going to talk about today on the card level is called game in hand win rate. So this is when that particular card is drawn, it shows up in a player's hand, how often are they winning those games? So in an ideal world, right, you'd expect that to be sort of 50% for a completely average card. However, it's actually not because 17 Lands users win more than they lose because they're more experienced, more competitive players than the average Arena player. So the average 17 Land user wins 54% of their games in this cube season. So that's actually sort of par for a win rate of a card. And we just have to remember as well that the decks that 17 Lands users might gravitate towards are probably not necessarily going to be the same as the decks that the regular user are gravitating towards. They may be being a little bit more spiky and just trying to win, probably trying to maximize their win rate more than most people who are maybe showing up and trying to just draft something sweet.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is my janky brews will not be skewing the numbers in any way.
I mean, listen, I'm on 17 Lands, and I told you I set a second pick to Brain Freeze, right? So we're certainly not talking in absolute.
Oh, good.
But I think it's there's above average amount of try-harding amongst the 17 Lands players, which is not a bad thing by any means.
No, definitely, yeah. But yeah, as James mentioned, like that kind of like 54%. Like I was saying, the kind of like that's our average. So everything above that is a above average card. Everything below that is in theory a below average card. Is that a baseline that we're kind of working with?
Yeah, for sure. That's a pretty good place to start.
Marvelous. All right. Well, let's actually just jump down to brass tacks. James, what is the data telling us is the best deck? Like, what do we want to be drafting?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So I've used this tool quite a bit for looking at various different booster draft formats, right? And as well as showing you the win rate of cards, it also shows you win rate of decks by like color combinations, right? So normally you go into this data, and unless it's like very, very early in the format, you look at the color pairs and you might think like, say we're in like Shadows over Innistrad, blue black's really good. Like, okay, well, blue black's the best deck, and that's at like 57, 58%, and then like our green white say is complete trash, and you look at the data and that's at like 54%. They're normally fairly closely clumped together, and similarly in terms of how often people are drafting them, because mostly people in most of them formats, people just draft what's it, right? That's not the case here.
Yeah.
I've never seen it so dominated by sort of a specific two colors. Red and white aggressive decks are drafted by 17 lands users way more than everything else, and they're absolutely crushing with them.
They had 10 times more games than Orzhov. Just looking at the data here.
Yeah, if you look at if you look at purely two color decks, which I understand is not necessarily most cube decks, but if you look at straight two color decks, there are more boros decks in the 17 lands database than the other 9 color pairs combined.
Wow. Okay.
And it wins way more. So
yes,
17 lands users,
and it has the highest win rate.
Yeah, playing straight boros wins 61.2% of games. The next highest color pair is Rakdos at 56.5%. And this is sort of pans out as well if you look at sort of the monocolor decks. Mono white and mono red win way more than everything else. If you look at monocolor plus a splash, then mono red plus a splash and mono white plus a splash are winning more than everything else. I've never seen data this skewed before. It's certainly interesting. And it really pans out if you look at the card data. The card data is, if anything, more jarring, I would say. If you look at the win rates of the cards and you sort by win rate, the top cards in Vintage Cube, it turns out we were all wrong. It's Ajani, Nacatal, Pariah.
What have we been doing all this time talking about like Black Lotus and all these other apparently good cards? Yeah. The raw numbers is Ajani, Nacatal, Pariah. Damn you, Modern Horizons 3.
Yeah. Followed by Ocelot Pride, Time Walk finally showing up at third place. Parallax Wave beating out Black Lotus. The most jarring to me was Sanguine Evangelist at number 8. Like, that card's very solid, don't get me wrong. I'm not being a hater. But what we're seeing here, right, is that the win rate data from the color pairs is actually sort of almost invalidating the win rate data of the individual cards, because we're seeing the cards that are only played in boros or only played in aggressive decks having way higher stats than everything else. Because even though if, a Mox Pearl is a better card in your white aggressive deck than Ajani, right? I don't think that's a controversial statement. But decks that play Ajani are probably white aggressive decks and probably therefore win loads, whereas decks that play Mox Pearl might be some combo deck which have not been doing well if you just look at the stats in aggregate.
Yeah, the context for that is very important. Yeah. As you're saying, Ajani is only played in the most winningest deck, whereas in theory, anyone could take a Mox Pearl and it could go in effectively any deck. So the strategic nature of Ajani kind of puts it above. Like, when it's in its deck, it's going to perform stronger, but it's only played in its deck, whereas, like, Moxes are played in everything, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why you see, I think the first boxes are actually fairly far down the list. I think we're talking sort of 30-ish. Yeah, Mox Ruby is the Mox with the highest win rate. It is just below Showdown of the Skalds.
Just below. Jesus Christ.
That's I would not recommend going into powered cube drafts and following these win rates for your pick order. I will say that.
That is wild. And I think we've known for a while, like here's the thing of like on MitGo, like when the powered cube has been up, if you want to farm wins and go infinite, you do kind of like, it has been a thing in the past of like you force mono white or you force boros, or you force boros. Like mono red hasn't been as hot in the last couple of years. It is kind of like a mono white or boros build. There's kind of like people have generally known has been the strongest for results, but this seems overkill. If that makes sense, kind of like I'm assuming most cubes aren't as balanced, aren't as unbalanced as this data, James.
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on here. So, firstly, I want to come back to who this data is from. This is from like limited grinders, right? If you're good at booster draft, I think you can draft boros and cube really well. Like the play patterns are not unfamiliar play patterns to anyone who's like played limited a bunch, right? And you can probably identify the good cards pretty easily. And it's kind of just booster draft, but all the cards are more powerful, right?
Yeah, it's turning good things sideways. Like not to diminish the archetype because it is very strong, but like it is turning things sideways and killing people as quickly as possible. It is, in theory, less convoluted than like your flash pile, like your flash deck or your doomsday pile, if that was in the cube, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It's and I think you do play a lot of like long and interactive games with these decks, but it's a very much like limited fundamentals sort of play experience, right? Whereas the combo decks, and I think even to a certain extent the control decks are going to be a little bit more. They'll take more getting used to. For like, I'm not saying like these are the hardest things in the world to draft and no one can draft them, but it maybe takes a little bit more getting used to, and you need to, and you sort of mess it up a few times first if you haven't played a bunch of cube, and then you get the hang of it, right? So I think that's a bit of what's going on. But the other thing is, in a normal limited format, right? Say you looked at these stats after like a week and it looked like this. Then what you'd expect to happen is that everyone starts taking the boros cards because they're getting bodied by it every time they play. And then it becomes harder to get a good version of the boros deck. And so other stuff starts winning more. That didn't happen here. Like this cube was up for like a few weeks, right?
Yeah, for 3 weeks it was up.
Yeah, and the stats don't really look any different if you look at the first week versus the last week. So you could look at that and say, everyone drafting it's an idiot and they don't notice they keep losing to the same deck every time and they can't adjust. I doubt that's what's going on somehow. And sure, you could look at it and say, well, 17 lands using boros loads. But if you look at the data, it actually doesn't suggest that holds for the general population, because we can look a little bit deeper than just for win rates here. There's a stat that 17 lands tracks called average last CNAT. So this is basically how late the card goes on average. When it shows up in your draft as a 17 lands user, what's the last pick you're likely to see it? And the interesting thing about this stat is it's affected by everyone's draft picks, not just 17 lands users, right? Because if everyone's taking the card very early, then I'm never going to see it 6th pick. And the value is sort of, if it was a card that was hypothetically always taken first pick, would have an average last CNAT of 1, and a card that always went 15th, I guess, would have an average last pick CNAT of 15. So like Black Lotus, for example, is an average last CNAT of 1.06 because it's almost always taken first.
So statistically, it is passed. Okay, good.
Yes.
There is a chance.
Yeah. So you'd expect these boros cards that are winning loads and people are adjusting to have really low average last CNATs, right? And it's just not true. Like you look at Parallax Wave, that's like the fourth most winning card in the cube, has an average last CNAT of 4.5. So you get that like 4 on 17 lands in most drafts. Compare that to something like Time Twister, which has a way lower win rate, but has an average last CNAT of 2.5. So it goes sort of whole two picks earlier on average. What that sort of tells me is that most people aren't just trying to max their win rate, right? And that shouldn't be surprising. Like, I think most people who show up to draft Vintage Cube want to do a cool Vintage Cube thing. And they may be down to draft boros once or twice, but they also want to try and do some big splashy stuff. And they're sort of okay with it if that's not necessarily the most winning strategy. So I think what the outcome of all of that is that the format doesn't really adjust, and that's how you end up with these really skewed numbers, right? Because in the last week of the cube, the people who are grinding boros can still get a great version of the boros deck. And the other thing of the boros deck compared to other decks in cube, right, is it's very redundant. Like it's not relying on opening specific cards in the way that a lot of other decks are, right? Like, sure, Ajani might be the best 2-drop, but if you don't get Ajani and you have Luminarch Aspirin, like your deck will still be good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think there's a bunch of different factors that I kind of want to drill down into as to why boros is so incredibly strong. And like so just jumping back to one thing you said a minute ago in terms of if this was a regular limited in format, people would be adapting. And I think that's because, it is like Cube is more of a unique thing. Like when people see people play, or like most of the content we've had over the last couple of years of Powered Cube isn't people turning an Ajani sideways. It's like, how do I win with this Storm deck, or how do I do this kind of bit? Like one of the selling points of Powered Cube is doing the big dumb splashy thing. So like. I'm not saying that the stakes are lower than a regular set draft, but like I think the mindset going into it for a lot of players is, if that makes sense, it's like, oh, this cube has this in it, I want to do that, is more of a thing than you get in regular limited environments. And I think that's why maybe we're seeing, like, this is a personal anecdote, but like I would rather go into a game of Arena Cube and try and do something cool and lose a bunch of games than do the same thing every time. I think that is definitely a feeling for some people when it comes to the Powered Cube. Kind of like, on that point, before we kind of dive into anything else, would you kind of go along with that, James?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I drafted any boros this season. I think where I stand this is I am like okay with like in Cube most of the time not drafting the most winning strategy. I want to do something that's cool. I don't want to feel like I'm being an idiot for that. You know, I want to feel like I'm just like chucking away my win equity. You know, I want to feel like you can get there with these other decks, even if it's a little bit harder. You know.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I think let's move on to kind of some of the other reasons why boros might be so strong. And you touched on it a moment ago as well, in terms of just redundancy with the archetype. From a cube list, this does have a lot of redundant effects in our aggressive slots. And to an extent, this is kind of a byproduct, or like it's a byproduct of multiple things. But kind of like the inherent goal of a powered cube is really to include the most powerful cards. And it means that kind of like a deck that's just running that kind of, like, there isn't that much synergy in a boros aggro deck. It's more play efficient, powerful cards and have a bunch of them and turn them sideways. And like as an archetype in this type of cube, that's going to do well in general, because if just like all of your 1 and 2 drops in white and red are just efficient death spells, there is a lot for you to choose from, on top of some of the most broken cards in the cube, with things like Broadside Bombardiers and Gut being available to you as well as your top end, and Parallax Wave, as James mentioned, being one of the most strongest cards in the cube. Just from a consistency point of view, it's going to be strong because there are so many slots for it. Like, what do you think about that, James? In terms of just like makeup of the cube, just how many cards could in theory go in a red and white aggressive deck?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of slots, and it's got a lot more haymakers than it used to as the thing, right? I think one of the big things here is Modern Horizons, and like some of the aggressive decks weren't great before; they were. But prior to the Modern Horizons type sets, if you were going to be one of those cards of outstanding power level in cube, outside of obviously the busted old cards. Generally, it was because there was some interaction, right? That you were maximizing. There was you could make the card do something, right? Because they just didn't print cards of standalone power level that would make them sort of standout level cards in powered cube. Whereas the Modern Horizon cards, and this includes but is not limited to the aggressive creatures. You don't have to do work to make them of outstanding power level, right? Like they just have to do the thing they say on the card. Like Ajani, Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls. These cards don't require you to build around them, really, right? Like you're all of those cards have interactions which can make them better. Like you go Ajani into Goblin Bombardment, and yeah, it's broken, it's cool. But Ajani by itself is already insane. And I think though that means that the boros decks just get haymakers in a way that it didn't used to. No.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, its card quality has definitely gone up. But also, I just did a very quick count of cards I would be happy running in a boros aggro deck. And in this 540 cube, I got to like 60. That means realistically a pod. Actually, it was 60 without even getting into colors and multicolor, so it's going to be more. So realistically, a pod could support 2 boros aggro decks, and they'd probably be fine.
Yeah. And it can be, and sometimes it's like there's a boros deck and like a heavy white deck splashing blue or something like that, and it's, but yeah, it can support multiple players for sure. Which again didn't used to be the case, right? Like, yeah, mono white's great, but you don't want to have to fight for it. Whereas boros, the way boros is now, you kind of can do it. And the reason it's boros, by the way, more so than monocolor, is because you do have these haymaker cards. So a lot of the boros decks will have like a base color, but they'll be like base white with 5 or 6 red cards, or base red with 5 or 6 white cards, or gold cards, obviously. But because the two colors have such like overlapping goals about trying to be aggressive, and so you often just it often ends up that if you're drafting a base white aggressive deck, it makes sense to play some red cards, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that does make sense. You already kind of touched on that the thought of not playing boros being an incorrect choice is a reason. It could potentially put you off playing it. Like, do you think this needs to be rebalanced for future iterations of the cube? Because here's the thing of like, in theory, if their goal was to create a very powerful cube with all the powerful cards, they did in theory do that. Like, they did make a very good boros deck. But there are other cards they are not running from a power level point of view. Like, there's no initiative cards, there's no time vault, that kind of stuff. Do you think that maybe we'll see this rebalanced in the next iteration of the cube?
So to be clear, I don't think we're in a spot where you have to force boros. I didn't do a shooting with. I think I did like 10 drafts, but my win rate was really good, and I didn't really play boros. But it is probably the easiest way to get a really high win rate, I did very much find myself warping my picks to beat boros.
Right, okay. So what you're taking that Toxic Deluge, or you're taking like a Fire Covenant or like a Burst Lightning slightly higher than you would normally?
Yeah, I think people are really undervaluing the cheap removal. Like, I really wanted like 3 or 4 1-mana removal spells in my deck if I can possibly get them. And like I'm willing to play not great ones, you know? Like, I'm looking at like a random Jeskai control deck here. I'm playing Galvanic Blast with not very many artifacts, you know? Because I just want to be able to kill their 1-drop on turn 1. And I think that is a bit of the weirdness of how Arena Ladder works, where even though you draft against a group of people from a mixture of ranks, if you're near the top of Mythic, you're playing against other people near the top of Mythic, so then I'm disproportionately playing against a lot of boros decks. But I did find I was very much warping my picks to try and beat boros. And similarly, like I drafted a bunch of like lowest decks because they want to play loads of cheap interaction anyway, so that like leans into the let's beat up on boros thing. I could honestly do a whole episode about like how you can try and farm boros. I think it's interesting. So I don't think it's unbeatable, but I do think it is like warping, you know. And I think there's also a bit of a thing here, right? I think the stats show quite clearly that people are going out of their way and like are willing to give up some win rates to draft some of the other stuff rather than this. And it kind of raises the question of like, if your players aren't having as much fun drafting this deck and want to draft other stuff, then maybe you should just build the cube in a way where they're a bit more incentivized to do that.
No, I get you. So it's like one of the thoughts I had, and it's not really a rebalance. It's more just give the colors more things to do. Because like one of the ways that I've in theory powered down aggro in my own cube environments is by making them do stuff. So it's kind of you're not just giving them all the best broken red and white cards. You're kind of like giving them a bit of an engine. It's not just a free win. So like in mine, yeah, we talked about the artifact aggro package, but I have that in kind of like Rakdos in mind. But like you could do things like an energy package, or you could do like +1/+1 counters in Selesnya to kind of like take some of your picks from white. You could do like a token strategy for maybe some aristocrat stuff. So kind of like I think part of it is like this as a cube is. When I say it's not a tight list, I mean that there is a lot of cards you would be like you could cut this down to a 450 incredibly easily just by removing efficient cards. But what that means is kind of like there's just a lot of room to like cut the third best lightning bolt and add a bit of synergy or do something like that. So I think that's something I would like to see on a further iteration of this. Like not just like cut cards, like don't cut Ragavan for a worst 1-mana 2/1. If you're going to cut a card, make another archetype, something like that. Kind of like, would you go along with that, James? Anyway?
Yeah, I'd be down for that. And I think, this can be fairly light touch, right? I don't think you necessarily even need to go in and cut the broadside bombardiers and gut and everything. Because, it's powered cube, right? People want to play with the busted cards. And, blue players get to play with Time Walking Ancestral, right? And like, I think, red can have some kind of cracked 3-drops. White can have a Parallax Wave. Go for it. But you can maybe do like just a few tweaks, right? Yeah, I think making them have a little bit of synergy is kind of an interesting idea, right? Like, I think there was a point where the Mitgo Vintage Cube was like leaning into that discard matters theme a little bit more. And you kind of see it already a bit here, right? I think like Evora is in, for example, Intia's in. Like maybe you just lean into that a little bit more and cut a few generically good red aggressive cards, like maybe, Death Greeter's Champion can go or something. Like I'm sure it has a higher win rate than Orthomoxen. I don't want to know about it. But maybe that can become like some interesting discard mattersy card, right? And then maybe white can be doing some tokens thing, or and it doesn't mean all the red aggressive cards have to be that, but you can have a little bit of a package and cut a couple of generically powerful cards, and maybe that just tweaks the balance a little bit,
Exactly. And I think this is like this part of the conversation is an important one for anyone who runs a cube, because every cube does need to be balanced. Like one of the things with the 17 lands data is that we get hard, like a lot of data very quickly on what needs to be balanced. So that's why we can kind of spend all this time talking about what needs to happen to boros. But like in your own cubes, this is where things like taking pictures of winning decks can be helpful, because effectively you are getting you are slowly gathering your own data set. And kind of like sometimes it's easy, sometimes you see the same card wrecking house like 5 drafts in a row, but sometimes just by getting pictures of cube decks, you can slowly gather this data for yourself, and kind of like you won't be able to go into as much granular detail in terms of like and find out that specifically Guide of Souls is like the 5th winningest card in Magic, for example, but like you can at least like start building that data set yourself to kind of ask yourself these questions of how can I adjust. And like we've touched on ways of not downgrading boros, but kind of like adjusting it by like maybe adding some more packages or some archetypes. One thing they could also do, which is another kind of lever you can pull, is upgrading other decks. Like one thing I heard with this cube, and like from my experience of it, is like things like Reanimator was fairly underpowered because it was missing the instant speed reanimation effects, and it was missing cards like Through the Breach. And when we've done cube, normally the thing that stops the aggro player is running into a turn 2 Archon of Cruelty. Like that really stops the aggro player in its tracks a lot of time. And just like, do you think the lack of Reanimator was a part why boros was so strong in this one, for example?
Yeah, for sure. I think it matters. I think it is one of the sort of natural predators of these aggro decks, right? Because the aggressive decks don't have great ways of interacting with Reanimator stuff. Like of cards you would main deck, it's basically Containment, Priest, or Bust, right?
Yeah.
And the good Reanimator draws are just quicker, right? They just go too big too quickly. And not that you need Shallow Grave to beat the aggressive decks if you're in Reanimator, but it is just a downgrade to that deck in general, right? Especially, I think I don't understand really why they bothered putting in all the big Eldrazi, because there's just not enough to do with them. Like there's Sneak Attack and Channel, but Channel kind of sucks, so it's kind of just Sneak Attack.
Yeah, so I think so. I have this in my notes. I wanted to touch on it at some point, and I think this is kind of one of the best place for it. Is like, to an extent, as a project, this is awesome. I'm a big fan of it. But one thing I think you are seeing from the cube list, and kind of we touched on some of these weird inclusions, like a card like Jace Wielder of Mysteries with no support. It's a win the game if you have no cards in library. There's no other cards that support that strategy in this cube. Some of the choices they made do come across that it comes across as a byproduct of copying a cube rather than designing one from scratch. So they've looked at the powered cube, they've looked at a powered cube. They may have looked at the Mitgo Vintage cube and gone, oh, it's full of big Eldrazi. Well, we need big Eldrazi as well. But they haven't really thought about why are the Eldrazi there, and like having ways of getting them into play consistently is one reason they are there. And if you don't, and there's a conversation that maybe should have been had of, from a design point of view, if we don't have the instant speed reanimation effects and we don't have Through the Breach, are the Eldrazi good? Like in hindsight, we can see that they are not. Like these are cards that are in like, so we talked about some of the boros cards being in the top percentile of cards. Like most of the Eldrazi are like ranked under F tier, with the only one not being Emrakul, like big Emrakul. All the other Titans are like the lowest ranked cards in this cube, which is wild. And like there's a lot of like, one thing I do want to move on to is like I think part of it is like looking at the top of the cube gives you some interesting anecdotes and things you can work on, but also so does looking at the bottom of the cube. Like in terms of rankings, like yeah, as I mentioned, all the Eldrazi are there, but so's Grizzlebrand, so's Yorgmoth's Will, so's Survival of the Fittest, and Displacer Kitten. Like these didn't become bad cards overnight. I think it's more a symptom of the decks that they are a part of. Either aren't, like some of them I think are down there because maybe they are showing their age. Things like Kratos Behemoth has been cut out of more powerful cubes now, and I think that's a card that's kind of a card and a strategy that has shown its age. But like, Bolus's Citadel is one of the lowest ranked cards in this cube, and I'm not going to hear that is a bad Magic card.
So I've spent some time using this data to analyze other limited formats, right? And I think one of the lessons I've learned is that so having a good win rate is certainly really strong evidence that the card is good and well positioned in the format, right? You can't have a 60% game win rate and secretly be a bad card. That doesn't make sense. Having a low win rate, I think, actually is not conclusive evidence that the card is bad. Because it can just be that people are putting it in decks where they shouldn't. And people are using the card wrong. Like, so a card I'd give an example first, right, is and Displacer Kitten was right down there at the bottom of the list. Something horrendous.
It is the second worst blue card in the cube,
yes,
according to the data.
Makes sense. And I think I can give an educated guess that the reason that is there, right, is that people are like, oh, look, I've got like a few good enter the battlefield effects. I'll put a Displacer Kitten in my deck and that'll be great. And you can't do that. It's a 4-mana 2/2. If you're just doing that, the card sucks. But if you're doing tracks off and you like have a bunch of zeros and you have like Kitten Coveted Jewel going, then it's really strong. Or I had a really nice Kitten deck where I had for like the combo with the 3-mana Teferi, and I think I had like 4 zeros, 4 balls, and it's like, you know, you can flicker the planeswalkers with them and add like a Lurrus to pick up the baubles and keep going. And it was really strong. Like, Displacer Kitten was a card I wanted to see in all of my draws. But a lot of the times, Displacer Kitten, so, you know, and if people only put Displacer Kitten in the decks where it actually belonged, then it probably has a more like middle of the road win rate, right? But people are putting Displacer Kitten in a bunch of decks where it doesn't belong and using it wrong, and therefore the card has an awful win rate. I think, yeah, like similarly, right, like Yawgmoth's Will as a trash win rate, that doesn't surprise me at all. And not to say that like you should be playing Yawgmoth's Will all the time, or that, you know, you certainly shouldn't be taking it highly, but I think it does merit a place in the cube. You know, there are decks that really want a Yarg Will, and it lets you do a bunch of interesting stuff. So, like, I wouldn't go through and say, like, oh, we can cut all the bottom cards. But,
Yeah. 100%. I was not going, like, all the cards in F, just, like, I was not going, chop them, they're trash, they're gone. I never want to play with a Crucible of Worlds or a Survival of the Fittest again. I am not, it's more I'm saying that I either, because Grizzlebrand is down here, and I know Magic has changed, but like there was an LSV article like 3 or 4 years ago that still had Grizzlebrand quite like extremely high. And I think it's like what I'm saying is that's more of a sign of, I think some of these cards are down here because the decks that they are here aren't supported. Like Survival of the Fittest being down here. Like Survival of the Fittest is maybe my top 3 in terms of favorite Magic cards, but it doesn't have a place in this cube. But Survival of the Fittest is an awesome card, but it does show its age. And for it to be in a cube, you need things like, I don't know, some madness creatures. You need Avengevine. You need to be doing something. It can't just be a value, slowly find my combo type card. Especially as there's no creature combos really in this cube as well. It's kind of like, what is Survival doing for me? Like I think there was a bunch of choices like that, which, yes, they are very cool cards, but Cube isn't a like that's one of the reasons why Boros, I think, is so good, is because individual cards are good individually in a vacuum, whereas Survival needs a bunch of cards to support it. So does Grizzlebrand, so does Yorg's Will, so does like so many of the cards which are down in the bottom tiers of this cube.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you need cards to support them, and you need to draft a very, very specific deck, right, to make Survival good. Like, even if there were some pieces that justified Survival, you would still have a bunch of people putting it in decks where you shouldn't play Survival, right? Because they're like, oh, it's just a powerful card.
Because it's cool. Because it's cool.
It is cool. And that's a great reason to play any card. But it would trash its win rate, right? Whereas, you know, you look at the cards at the top, like, how do you play Ajani wrong? You know, you kind of can't. I think a combination of some of the cards at the bottom aren't supported, some of them you can draft good decks around them in this cube, but people also put them in a bunch of decks where they're bad. They're almost all very like context dependent cards, right?
No, definitely 100%. But like when I see Grizzlebrand down below in terms of win rate, that is a card that I think would prey on an aggro deck. So if in the next version of this cube, it'll be a combination like if Grizzlebrand is higher, I think that will mean naturally that Boros will do worse.
That is true. It is actually worth flagging while we're on stuff like Grizzlebrand. There's a little bit of weirdness in the stats with things like that, because remember when we look at game in hand win rate, we're looking at when you had that card in your hand.
In your hand? And Grizzlebrand shouldn't be in your hand.
Well, I mean, a lot of the times you want it in your hand, right? You want to see it in your hand at some point because you want to discard it and then reanimate, and then it does show up. But it's worth noting that, like, if you cast Entomb, put Grizzlebrand in your graveyard and then reanimate it, Grizzlebrand was never in your hand that game. So that game doesn't actually count for the stats, even though Grizzlebrand literally won you the game.
No, that is important things to know with data. So maybe Bolus Citadel and Sundering Titan are down here.
Yeah, Tinker Target. You Tinker Target. It's never in your hand.
Again, that is important. Again, like this is something that kind of like if you just looked at the data, I guess you wouldn't get from that. Yeah, again, context is very king with that. I'm assuming as well. Then is that a similar reason why, most of the triomes are really far down the lists? From my experiences, like triomes have having an untapped dual land has been more important in this version than ever. But is I'm assuming because if we're a splash deck, we're fetching for our triumph first, meaning it's not in our hand. That would also be why they're relatively lower on the win rate, or on the appearing in our hand when we win a game type.
Yeah, it's giving you a bit of value being in your deck even when you don't draw. Yeah, maybe that's a small thing. Triumphs are weird, right? Because it's like if you have one tap land is fine, two is not, sort of things. Like you're down to have the first triumph in your opening hand, so you have to get 3 colors off it, but you don't want the second ones. Yeah, it's interesting these stats because there's game in hand win rate is often like the default that it's gone to because it's it's arguably if you're going to pick one number, it's maybe the best one, but it's certainly not perfect. And there's stuff like things you just want to tinker for. Maybe it's not the best way to judge their win rate, right? Another stat you can use is game played win rate, where that's just looking at how often do you win when that card is in your deck, regardless of whether you draw it or not. Which is those stats tend to be a lot flatter because you're not differentiating between the games where you drew your Minsk and Boo and the games where you didn't, right? But that it does remove the weirdness about things you choose it for. Oh, God, do you want to know what the highest game played win rate card in the cube is?
Tell me, James. What is it?
Sanguine Evangelist.
Really?
Yeah, 60.9%.
There's a world where we did a set review on this set. There's a world we didn't even review this card. Or if we did, it's a fine Rabble Master, blah, 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 blah. Let's read Sanguine Evangelist, because I feel we should actually... the most winningest card. 2 and a white, 2/1 creature vampire cleric with Battle Cry, which means when it attacks each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And when it enters or dies, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. Better than a Mox.
Apparently so. Yeah, it's just a thing where people are only putting that card in a very specific deck. And don't get me wrong, the card's really solid. Good against removal, gives you a lot of damage. I have nothing bad to say about it, but it is a 3-mana 2/1 that only goes in the boss deck.
Yeah. It does feel like they will adjust it in some way. And yeah, we've talked about a couple of different options. My gut is they will do a combination of both. I think that because of these, the reasons why cards like the instant speed, reanimation effects, and Through the Breach aren't on Arena are because they both have mechanics that are a bit of a faff to code, or that basically it wasn't worth it. So with the instant speed reanimation effects, you need to program Graveyard Orders matters into Arena, and with Through the Breach, you need to program Splice onto Arcane. With the success of the cube, with the success of like how well it's gone, I would imagine they will have the bandwidth to program these cards for the future. The other thing as well is that this, like, the Arena Cube also obviously didn't have any Universes Beyond cards. And I'm not saying that there aren't any good Boros aggro cards in Universes Beyond. There definitely are. But it does add other tools that they can kind of pick from to try and rebalance things as well. Like things like One Ring or Orcish, like Orcish Bowmasters being introduced could quite... like, that's quite good at pinging out some... Like, it's a good early threat for a slower deck. So that could be some nice tools. Like I think we'll see their introduction slowly over the life cycle of this cube. Like, it might not be in the next version, but I think we will see that, like, as well as some other balancing, basically, would be my gut.
Yeah, I mean, Bowman's insane against Boros, actually. That's a great point. One Ring quite strong as well. Yeah, I think my guess is they won't do that much to Boros. I think they'll like maybe chuck in a couple more cheap removal spells to like give the deck slightly more tools, and they'll I think they will make some changes around like, oh yeah, there's not actually anything to do with this Ulamog. Like, I can see an argument for keeping Emrakul exactly because it's like Sneak Emrakul's still really good, and it has this channel Emrakul is like, well, it's not actually good. I feel like it's well, no, it is good, but the channel decks are not good.
It's iconic.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an iconic, like, busted thing you can do in Powered Cube. So I think you leave it, but we don't need the other ones, right? So yeah, I think they'll do stuff around that. I doubt they'll actually make big changes to the Boros deck itself. I mean, I'm sure they'll like tweak things, but I'm not expecting them to really like lean into the other packages that much.
Yes, 100%. Again, because in theory, the goal, the game plan of building a powered cube is I am making the most powerful environment possible. Like, yeah, I in my own environments when I've gone for that, when the goal has been to hit a level of power, trying to raise other things up, I think is the first place to go, and then and then bring it down. Like, it's a short way of saying I expect them to cut some green ramp cards to add Reanimator and to never add Initiative to this cube because it would just break it.
Oh yeah. They can't add Initiative. The thing is, when you say like raise up decks, like, it's not like like there's Shallow Grave and Corpse Dance, but I think there are issues with getting them on Arena, and it's in most cube environments, right? You can just buff other decks. A lot of the time in Powered Cube, it's like you want to buff this deck, but the cards do not exist, right? It's not like there are a bunch of better Reanimator cards that are easy to add.
So there's the instant speed effects. I think Troll would be a big one, just getting that on Arena. Again, that's not on because...
missing that from UB or something. But yeah, you just sort of have less flexibility.
No, I do agree, but like I think like there's enough chaff and enough choices in here they can do to kind of like effectively give people other cool things to do, so that it's not so you will have people who want to win always forcing the Boros aggro deck, but like I mean like there are so many green ramp cards in here that just you can cut some and put in like some more beefy green creatures so that you can race the Boros aggro deck, or maybe it becomes a 3-color deck or something like that. Like, there's ways of changing up, so it's not just the same build and the same shell every time. I think that's kind of the thing that they kind of like might need, that don't make specifically Boros worse, but kind of like make Naya better, make other kind of combinations better, make other colors want their cards, so it's not as free, I guess, would be my way of putting it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd also like, I don't want to overstate how bad I think the problem is. Like, I started a ton of fun playing this. I think it's not nearly as unbalanced as the data makes it look. I think a big part of what's going on is it's not that the Boros decks are the only good decks. It's that you can't really go wrong drafting us, you know? Like, I found I did quite well drafting like the 4 and 5 color decks. I found I did well drafting suggest guide, but like I have played a bunch of Powered Cube right in the past, like and I think those decks piecing together the synergies, like I don't know, getting a good Nardu deck, a good Space Getting deck. These are you need very specific things, and you need to know when to go for them and when not to, and you just don't really need to know that much detail to get boros pretty much right. It's you just can't go that wrong. Like you can play it badly, and it is skill intensive to play, but I think you don't need tons of format knowledge to identify the good cards and draft a good curve of boss creatures and removal spells.
Yeah, one thing you said I do want to just touch on and agree with, like boros being like, unlike other limited formats where the best deck has been known and it can affect your enjoyment of the format a bit. I had no negative, or like that. Boros being the best deck in this format did not really affect my enjoyment of it. The main reason we wanted to talk about it today is because it's the first time we've had this data available to us on Powered Cube, and it is so striking. It really does stand out, which is kind of why we wanted to have a chat about it today.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think it's slightly off topic, but I think having the sort of quote unquote fun police in the format, I quite like. I often don't draft it a bunch, but I think it increases my enjoyment of other decks to be to have that clock, to fight.
Oh, 100%. Like I think my thing is I will definitely draft boros aggro. I will draft an aggro deck. I'll draft white aggro or like chunky red. But for me, it's more I'll draft it when it's open.
Exactly.
Or say there's nothing in my first pack, but there is a broadside because I know that's a cool card. Like maybe we'll go that way. But it's not like with any environment, I'm less of a fan of it when it's auto, what are we doing today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of time I'm like, hey, I might draft boss at some point, and I'll be like, next draft, if there's a power X5, I just drafted boss, I'm going to take a blue card instead, that's fine.
Exactly, and that's the thing. All of this does have the very big caveat as well of like, this is the first time we've seen it on Arena. This will be a lot of people's first time playing with a cube of this power level. I don't think it's hard to see a world where just in the future the other decks start doing better as people who are experiencing it for the first time get more experience with those decks. Like if you've never seen Storm before, having a couple of goes at it, you're going to be better the third or fourth time compared to the first. One last thing we should probably touch on, just from again, this all context is important with any kind of data set, is that because the ranked drafts were all best of one, boros is very, very good pre-sideboard. And there are a bunch of cards in the cube that are sideboardy cards. Like, I'm looking at, like, Unlicensed Hearst, for example. Like, these are cards that when it's best of one, you don't have the ability to sideboard them. And like, aggro is generally worse against sideboard decks because they can bring in any spare removal they have. They can bring in a board wipe that, like, maybe they're kind of like a aggressive E deck too, but if you're faster than them, they can they can have the option to sideboard in a sweeper in game two. But in best of one, aggro decks can just run supreme because it's like, what are we doing? Oh, I'm dead before you can do anything. You don't have a chance to react to them. So that is something that's important as well, kind of like comparing it to traditional draft, which was best of three. The other colors do a bit better. Like it's fun to see that. So when you can sideboard, the blue deck stands a bit more of a chance, and like actually Fractured Identity jumps up as well, which is quite nice to see. So it does seem that kind of like in best of threes there is a little bit more of a swing to non-aggressive decks.
I think the sideboarding thing is a great point. And the other thing which I think people really underrate about the difference between game one and game two, it's not just about the cards in your deck, right? It's that you know what you're playing against, and you know what you're playing against when you make your mulligan decision. You know what you're playing against when you play your first land. And I think, more reactive decks do just make much better use of that, right? How many times have you kept an opening hand thing like, this is fine unless they're on aggro, And sometimes you just got to keep those hands, and then they play a turn one island Guide of Souls, and you mentally go to game two. And that's a pretty big edge post board, right? But the reactive deck gets to mulligan to a hand which like has some tools. Not that you're always, you're going to mulligan to a perfect hand, but you can, but you have a lot more decision, a lot more knowledge when you make that decision, and I think that's a bigger deal for the slower, more reactive decks than it is for boros, because boros is mostly just going to keep hand with a good curve, and it doesn't really care that much what it's playing against.
No, that does track. Yeah, it's also nice to see that in best of three, a card like Tinker jumps up to being like an A minus. So yeah, so there is more room for more combo-oriented cards in best of three. So that's also nice to see.
Yes, for sure.
All right, awesome. Cool. I think that's where we're gonna end our conversation today. But yeah, in general, like I don't want anyone to go away from this thinking Arena Cube. Or Arena Powered Cube gets anything apart from 2 thumbs up. Like from my end, awesome, love to see it. But just having the data for the first time was really interesting. So that's kind of why we wanted to break it down a bit today.
Yeah, for sure. And it's cool to just get this data about Cube for the first time. Right? Like we've never seen anything like this before for Powered Cube.
Yeah, exactly. And also just remembering the context of it as well is one of the other things we want to touch on, because it is. Yes, Ajani, Nacatal, Pariah, technically the winningest card in Powered Cube, but there is context. It does need some help. Still take your Black Lotus or your Soul Rings first, please, kids.
It will not surprise you to know that there are some bad Reddit takes on this from a quick search.
So there's some Reddit takes is what I'm hearing. Good, yes, perfect. Okay. Right, well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. James, pleasure, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Awesome. Ooh, actually, by the time this has been out, you will have been up to Cube Clash, so we'll have to get your thoughts on that on an upcoming episode.
Oh yeah, I am psyched about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think if anyone beats you, they get a booster pack potentially. That's what we did last time. We'll see if that's still a thing. Let me know afterwards. But
yeah. See if it's still in place.
Right, but that's going to do it for today. Thank you all very much for listening. Do give the podcast a 5-star review, tell a friend, all that good stuff. Whatever positive affirmation your podcast platform of choice allows you to do. If you could do it, it helps us out and is all greatly appreciated. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.